Khudiram Bose was an Indian revolutionary from Bengal Presidency who opposed British rule of India. He was one of the youngest martyrs of the Indian independence movement for his part in the Muzaffarpur Conspiracy Case, for which he received a death sentence and was later put to death with Prafulla Chaki. By detonating bombs on the carriage they believed Magistrate Douglas Kingsford was in, Khudiram and Prafulla Chaki attempted to kill the British judge. However, Magistrate Kingsford was sat in a different carriage when the bombs were detonated, killing two British women. Before being captured, Prafulla shot himself to death. Khudiram was detained, put on trial for the killings of the two ladies, and ultimately given the death penalty. He was among the first Indian rebels hanged by the British in Bengal. Khudiram, the second youngest revolutionary in India, was 18 years, 8 months, 11 days, and 10 hours old when he was hanged. However, Mahatma Gandhi condemned the violence and mourned the loss of the two innocent women. He said, "These are not the means by which the Indian people would obtain their freedom." In his newspaper Kesari, Bal Gangadhar Tilak defended the two young men and demanded quick Swaraj. The British colonial authority then immediately arrested Tilak on suspicion of sedition. On 3 December 1889, in the little village of Mohobani in the Medinipur region of Bengal, Khudiram Bose was born into a Kayastha family. Tehsildar in the Nerajol was his father's position. Khudiram was the fourth child in a family of 3 daughters. His parents, Trailokyanath Bose and Lakshmipriya Devi, had 2 sons before the birth of Khudiram, but both of them died prematurely. Following the traditional customs prevalent in the culture, the newborn child was symbolically sold to his eldest sister in exchange of 3 handfuls of food grains locally known as khud, in an attempt to save him from dying at an early age. This way he acquired the name Khudiram. He joined Anushilan Samiti and connected with Barindra Kumar Ghosh's network in Calcutta. At the age of 15, he volunteered and was later detained for handing out leaflets critical of British authority in India. Khudiram took part in bombing government officials and police stations when he was just 16 years old. The first attempt to assassinate Kingsford involved a book bomb built by Hemchandra Kanungo, a revolutionary who learned how to make bombs in Europe. A pound of picric acid, 3 detonators, and an empty Cadbury cocoa tin were all packaged together. Paresh Malik, a young revolutionary, presented this to Kingsford's home in a piece of Herbert Broom's Commentaries on the Common Law that had been hollowed out and was then wrapped in brown paper. The unopened box was positioned on Kingsford's shelf for subsequent inspection. By March 1908, the government had transferred the judge to Muzaffarpur, Bihar, out of concern for his safety, and upgraded him to the position of district judge. He left behind his furnishings, library, and book bomb. Because of his unfair, partial, and harsh judgments of Indian nationalists, Calcutta Magistrate Douglas Kingsford was the target of Bose's murderous decision. Bose was the embodiment of courage. As a colonial British judge in Calcutta, Douglas Kingsford, formerly the Chief Presidency Magistrate, dealt with numerous cases involving revolutionaries and freedom fighters. He didn't judge Indian nationalists based on their merits, but rather on prejudice and hatred. He developed a terrible reputation as a result of his inhumane, unfair, and vengeful verdicts against the Swadeshi and anti-partition campaigners, and later, people in Bengal began to view him as harsh and brutal. Anushilan Samiti continued to pursue Kingsford's murder. A 2-person reconnaissance team, including Prafulla Chaki, visited Muzaffarpur in April. Hemchandra gave them the bomb when they got back. It contained 6 ounces of dynamite, a detonator, and a black powder fuse. Khudiram Bose, a new boy, and Prafulla Chaki returned to Muzaffarpur together. Suspicion was raised by Barindra Ghosh's and Aurobindo Ghosh's actions, as well as those of her group. Kingsford's assassination plot was made known to the Calcutta police. The Muzaffarpur superintendent of police disregarded the warnings from Commissioner F.L. Halliday. To protect the magistrate's home, though, 4 men were tasked. Meanwhile, Khudiram Bandyopadhyay's charitable inn, Dharmashala, became home to Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chaki, who took on the names Haren Sarkar and Dinesh Chandra Roy, respectively. The pair continued to keep tabs on their targets' daily routine and activities during the following days. For over 3 weeks, the 2 revolutionaries remained anonymous. A letter stating that the pair had not arrived was brought back by the CID officer from Calcutta by Muzaffarpur Superintendent Armstrong. Khudiram and Prafulla were prepared to carry out their intentions on 29 April evening. They examined the Muzaffarpur Park, which is across from the British Club and is frequented by Kingsford, while posing as little children. A police officer observed them. Kingsford and his wife were playing bridge one fateful day with Pringle Kennedy's daughter and wife, a British barrister. Around 8:30 p.m., they made the decision to go home. The carriage that Kennedy and his family were riding in was the same one that Kingsford and his wife were in. Khudiram and Prafulla hurled the bombs into the carriage as it approached the eastern entrance of the European Club compound in their carriage. The carriage was transported to Kingsford's home after a loud explosion. The Kennedy ladies suffered horrible injuries as a result of the carriage being broken. Mrs. Kennedy passed away on 2nd May from her injuries, and Miss Kennedy passed away an hour later. Khudiram and Prafulla took separate routes to avoid being apprehended. Khudiram had travelled 25 miles by dawn and arrived at the Vani station. 2 armed constables approached him as he approached a tea stall to ask for a drink of water because they immediately sensed something was wrong. They decided to hold Khudiram after asking a few more questions to confirm their growing suspicion. One of the 2 concealed revolvers was discovered as soon as Khudiram began to struggle with the 2 men. One of them gave Khudiram a bear hug from behind and stopped him from using the other one to fire on the constables. Khudiram, who was considerably younger and of a smaller build, had no prospect of defense or escape. 37 rounds of ammunition, 30 rupees in cash, a railway map, and a paper from the rail timetable were discovered on his person. Khudiram's destiny was set in stone for all time. Khudiram Bose Pusa station is the new name for the Vani station. Prafulla, on the other hand, had endured a long, arduous journey. Trigunachan Ghosh, a civil servant, spotted him about noon and made plans for Prafulla to return to Kolkata that evening. He left Samastipur on a train bound for Mokma and continued on to Havra on another train. Nandalal Banerjee, a sub-inspector with the Indian Imperial Police, was travelling in the same compartment. As they started talking, he understood Prafulla was the other revolutionary. Banerjee dispatched a telegram to the Muzaffarpur police station when Prafulla stepped off the train at the Shipwright station to get a sip of water. At the Mokma station, Banerjee made an attempt to capture Prafulla. Prafulla attempted to push through with his handgun, but when he was down to his final round, he accidentally shot himself in the mouth. Judge Konoff, Nathuni Prasad, and Janak Prasad presided over the jury as the historic trial got underway on 21 May 1908. Along with Khudiram, 2 other people, Mrityunjay Chakraborty and Kishorimohan Bandyopadhyaya, who had hosted Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chaki in his Dharmashala for their mission, were also accused of aiding the revolutionaries in their work. Mrityunjay passed away during the trial, and as a result, the trials of Kishorimohan and Khudiram were split. Khudiram resubmitted his statement to Magistrate E.W. Bredhaud on 23 May, this time denying any responsibility or involvement in any part of the mission or operation, including the bombing. Khudiram was first hesitant to sign this declaration, but after being persuaded by his attorneys, he did. The court and the prosecutors received an anonymous letter of caution on 13th June, the date set for the verdict and sentence, informing them that another bomb was headed their way from Kolkata and that the Biharis, not the Bengalis, would be responsible for their deaths. On the other hand, the letter gave the defense attorneys more assurance because it demonstrated that there might have been other masterminds and perpetrators of the Muzaffarpur bombing besides Khudiram. This, coupled with Khudiram's advanced age, should have persuaded the judge to impose a sentence other than the death penalty. But to everyone's disappointment, the judge gave Khudiram the death penalty. Khudiram's immediate and spontaneous response was to smile. The judge, surprised, asked Khudiram whether he had understood the meaning of the pronounced sentence. Khudiram replied that he surely had. When the judge asked him again whether he had anything to say, in front of a packed audience, Khudiram replied with the same smile that if he could be given some time, he could teach the judge the skill of bomb making. By then, the judge was instructing the police to escort the boy out of the courtroom. Khudiram's immediate and spontaneous response was to smile. The judge was taken aback and inquired of Khudiram as to whether he had understood the pronounced sentence. Khudiram retorted that he had undoubtedly. When the judge asked him again whether he had anything to say, in front of a packed audience, Khudiram replied with the same smile that if he could be given some time, he could teach the judge the skill of bomb making. The judge had already given the police the order to take the kid from the courtroom. The High Court hearing took place on 8 July 1908. Khudiram's defense was taken up by Narendra Kumar Basu, who applied all of his legal knowledge and expertise to the case in an effort to defend the young kid who had quickly become a national treasure and hero. He challenged the verdict of the Session Court with 3 points. He mentioned that the verdict was flawed. According to Article 164 of the Penal Code, the defendant must provide his testimony in front of a first-class magistrate, which Mr. Woodman was not, and furthermore, Khudiram received no information regarding the defendant's identity or position during the initial statement. Basu further emphasized that Article 364 mandates that all queries to the accused must be asked in that person's home tongue, and that all responses from the accused must be verbatim recorded in that language. However, this was done in English in Khudiram's case. In addition, Khudiram was obliged to sign the statement in front of the magistrate on the same day and at the time it was made, but in actuality, he was forced to sign the document the next day in front of a different magistrate. Finally, there was no evidence that Khudiram was free to speak freely after being captured without being subjected to any direct or indirect coercion. Finally, according to Narendra Kumar Basu, Khudiram was not as strong as Prafulla, alias Dinesh, who was the trial's expert in explosives. Therefore, it is very likely that Dinesh was the one who actually detonated the device. Prafulla's suicide as he was about to be apprehended only strengthens the likelihood that he was the one who really detonated the devices. After the defense, the 2 British judges declared that the final decision will be rendered on 13 July 1908. Since Khudiram was the only one of the 2 who was still alive, the case was built entirely on his lone admission that they were a 2-man team. It was anticipated that Khudiram's life would at least be spared for the sake of the law, about which the British took great pride, as all of Narendra Kumar Basu's legal arguments were thought to be technically accurate. However, the British judges upheld the conviction and imprisonment on a historic day and rejected the appeal. On 11 August, the area around the prison was increasingly crowded before the scheduled hour of 6 a.m. The first rows of the crowd were filled with people clutching flower garlands. The lawyer-journalist for the Bengali news outlet Bengali, Upendranath Singh, who was close to Khudiram, claims to have arrived at the location around 5 a.m. in a car with all the required clothing and funeral necessities. Following the hanging, a funeral procession passed across the city while police officers lined the main thoroughfare and kept onlookers at bay. As the carriage passed by, people began throwing flowers at the dead. Prominent newspapers dailies like Amrita Bazar Patrika, Anglo-Indian newspaper, and Kesari during that time covered the headlines of the story. Following his martyrdom, Khudiram gained such fame that Bengali weavers began creating a unique form of dhoti with the word Khudiram woven into it. These dhoti were worn by the boys who attended schools and colleges, stitched, and travelled the route to independence. In his own words, Khudiram made a statement while under arrest, recorded by the special branch of the police, before he was hanged. He said, "I was naughty in my childhood, but after I entered Midnapur Collegiate School, a change overtook me.